And you brought up a good point about us not knowing our history, and I can speak personally from my family. My mother, she probably won't like me saying this, but my mother would be 66 in November. My grandmother would be 101 in July. I would ask my mother, let's watch the Rosa Parks story. Why would I want to watch that? I lived it. I remember that. So I think that part of that history died out because a lot of our people, a lot of the older generation didn't want to relive that, so it wasn't taught. I was a student of my own, and I dropped the ball. One of my friends said, you need to interview your grandmother, just get her on tape, learn the history, because she is in her right mind enough to know that we have an African-American president. She's born in 1910. So she's seen history, but now it might be a little too late for her to give me all the history that, I mean, I'm pretty sure both of my grandmothers, I have one that's deceased, they had some stories to tell, but we tried to stay away from that because you don't want to, you're on a summer vacation, you don't want to be upset. And I think a lot of, that's where the disconnect came from the generations. A lot of the older generation didn't want to relive what they went through. So now our generation, we take things for granted. We don't understand what people died just so we can vote. And you still had a lot of people not going out to vote when Obama ran in 08. And 2010, we don't even want to talk about the midterm election because the voting was just horrendous. But I think that disconnect started where a lot of the older generation didn't want to relive that. They accomplished that, they got to the mountaintop, like Dr. King said, and then they, like, we're good. We don't want to touch. So I think, and I mean, it's on both of our generations. It was on the older generation to teach it, but it's also on us to seek that out. I had a 101-year-old grandmother that I would go see every summer, every Thanksgiving, and I never asked her what was it like in the 20s and 30s. Never. And that's on all of us. So I just want to encourage all of our audience members, the studio audience, and those watching on TSU TV to learn your history. Read a book. Everything you want to know is in a book. Talk to the older generation. Learn what they went through, and that way we won't take those things for granted.
We went to work eliminating slavery. Same thing when we went down to the Caribbean. Haiti, first freed nation by African slaves in the Western Hemisphere. Why is it in the shape it's in now? Because the Western Hemisphere's response were to punish that liberation effort in Haiti. So again, if we don't know our history, but this war of liberation that we fought all over the African continent really ended about 1994, 1992, with the walking out of Nelson Mandela from the prison after 27 years and his election within 2 years later as the first majority elected president in South Africa. Now we're talking about 1994. We're not talking about ancient history. And we accomplished that in about 50, 60 years from the imposition of colonialism on the African continent. The question is, where are we now? And what are we doing? We just elected the first African American in the history of these United States. Most of us thought we would never live to see that. And now, I thought about it, we make mistakes, we're too hard on ourselves. And I think about what that sister said to President Obama at that town hall meeting. I'm tired of apologizing for you. I'm tired of taking up for you. I want, water in the wine right now. I want you to walk on. Well, okay, fine. Let's hold all our leadership accountable. Let's hold President Obama accountable. Well, what about the Speaker of the House? What about the Tea Party Republicans? Have you listened to what they're saying? Are you holding them accountable? What about the governor of the state of Texas? This is your budget that just got cut without any offsetting raise in revenue. So I'll pause there. That kind of helps bring people up to historical date. But we've got to have an interest in and know the history of our people, or we cannot pass it on to our children.
All right, briefly before we go to the studio audience, Judon, I want you to just very briefly, what would your advice be to President Obama going into the 2012 election? He just announced that he's running. I mean, everybody knew he would run, but what would be your advice, just really quickly?
Believe it or not, I do think he made a couple of mistakes. I think he was so good-natured and presumed that both parties would work together to change Washington and really try to knit compromises that would be somewhere down the middle that all of them could take credit for and forge ahead with Americans. I think what he found out was, and I said this at a meeting, in Austin, I guess, at the Legislative Summit, I said, while some of us were cheering, after inauguration and caught up in this wonderful wave of euphoria, the people who lost were on the other side saying, hell no, one-term president, we're going to work today, and we'll by any means necessary in this presidency. Now, is that too strong a word? Well, if you are watching those town hall meetings and those addresses that President Obama gave publicly, people come into a presidential rally and a town hall meeting with guns on. That's what we saw, with pistols and guns. We saw people demonize the president with Nazi images, with ape-like images. We saw Tea Party Republicans, then yet unnamed as Republicans, basically hijacked all of the congressional meetings on health care and lied to the public. Death panels, government takeover of health care. None of that was true. And they disrupted the meetings. It was part of a calculated political strategy. And I think it kind of caught some of the progressive and President Obama a little bit off guard. I said, well, if that was what you saw in your first term, let me assure you that your run for a second term is going to be deeper than that. And what my challenge to our community is, the like community of interest, not just African American, Hispanic, progressives, you better fight like your life is on the line. This global economy is still teeter-tottering. If you better look at these budget cuts that already came from the state, that are already at the city, that are already at the school system, that are about to be imposed by the federal government, and understand that the very interests of your house, of your family, and your life is on the line.
I want to thank you again,
Thank you.
the Honorable Judon Boney, for gracing us with your presence, also Malik Ingram and Edward Davis, Texas Southern University students. Now we want to go to the studio audience to get their comments and questions on Black America and the Black president.
Hi, I'm Shamika Buckner here at Regal Roundtable, and I'm standing with Krista White, and she has a question for a panelist.
What more can President Obama do for Black America?
He elected to a second term, but he can't do it by himself. We're very fortunate to have somebody of the kind and caliber, quite frankly, of President Obama's leadership. And I don't mean the point now that historically and culturally he's African American or biracial or any of that. He's intelligent. And it has been admirable to see intelligence guide public policy, the political process that we've seen through this first 4 years of the Obama administration. And seeing the challenges that we face and confront, I would like to see that kind of intelligence guide the next 4 years.
Thank you.
If you could state your name and who you'd like to direct your question to.
My name is Shakira Dennis, and I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Boney. As soon as President Obama took office, afterwards you started seeing the political outlets go crazy. They were talking about a post-racial era. So do you genuinely believe that because we were instrumental in installing an African-American male to the office of president, that this actually signifies a post-racial era?
No, I think that myth has pretty well been exploded. It was something that was floated out, I guess I presume, by the cultural conservatives. But there actually has been an increase in hate crimes since President Obama took office, and not just against African Americans. We've seen this racial divide expand with respect to Hispanics, and this wild legislation that has been proposed and passed in Arizona. And so when we look at the southern and Midwest states, we see racial tensions, unfortunately, increasing, not moderating. And I think it's because of the confusion in the political debate. Too much pundits and persuasion and opinions, and not enough facts and information brought to the public on a daily basis. And we have to be smarter consumers of that.
I mean, to add to that, I think generationally, or generational-wise, a lot of young people, there's been a change. As far as the older elements that I think Mr. Boney is referring to, are some old heads that won't die easily. That's that, I guess you can say, that old element. But among, I guess you can say, a lot of younger people, I see a lot of more racial understanding, a lot of more racial cooperation. among that segment. But as far as the older generation, I see that rigid, not willing to let go easily of what they think the country should be based on what their forefathers created as.
You can state your name to our panelists and audience and who your question is going to.
My name is George Foreman, and my question is to the panel overall. Earlier, Professor Smith asked, what does, asking you guys to play the devil's advocate, but he asked, what does the Republican Party have to offer in general more to the TSU students? My question is, I want to restate the question because I didn't get a solid answer. How do you, it's a two-part question, I want to restate the question and ask, how do you present that information in a non-biased way? Because no matter which way you cut it, you have to be on one side or the other. You can't really promote for the Republicans if you're a Democrat. It's hard to do so. So as educators, how do you present both sides of the picture?
Very good question. And there is an option. You can be an independent, which is primarily what most of the American electorate describes themselves now as neither Democrat nor Republican, but independent. Because there has been a failure of both parties to be consistent in the representation of interests and the policies that they say they advocate. So now we've got a rebirth of the Tea Party Republicans in that movement that says, you know, we can't stand this deficit spending. We got to cut the federal budget right away, today, tomorrow. 10 years ago, they didn't care. 10 years ago, they ran 2 wars and just forced the administration to do another tax cut for people who make over $500,000. Now, if I made over $500,000, you know, I wouldn't mind paying less taxes. I don't happen to be in that situation. And the question that we have to ask ourselves, I don't even have a problem. I have some friends that are African Americans that are Republican. They're business people, very successful business people. And I have some white Republican friends and colleagues who say, you know, I just think that we're spending too much money at the government level. I get concerned about how much money is being spent at the government level. But the question is, what are we spending it for? What are we investing it in? And what does it produce? So I think, just on the basis of analysis, that the best investment we can make for human beings is to invest in their education and retraining to be competitive in the 21st century. Now the scholars say, the statistics say, that we're producing less science, technology, and math graduates and scholars now than ever before, and we're something like 16th in the world list. I don't think that helps make America competitive. So the policy, whether you're Democrat or Republican, is I want to invest in that. I think it's inhumane that some people are born into poverty and never have a chance to work their way out of it. If we were living as we were in the 60s and the 50s, you might have a high school degree and get a job at the plant. Get some unit benefits and some retirement benefits and some health care and earn your way into a low or middle income home and take care of your kids. There aren't any plant jobs available today. So we've got to take the older generation who didn't get a degree, and they got to go back to school, which is one of the things I did. We got to take the younger generation that for whatever reason didn't go to school and say, you've got to go to school because we're in an information-driven, super technology era, and if you don't have those skills, you're basically obsolete and you have no way to compete. So again, the issues, the facts, the public policy, and the public policy results or impact, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent. And I thank you for your thoughtful question.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Regal Roundtable. Once again, I'm your host, Todd A. Smith. I want to thank Malik Ingram again, Honorable Judon Boney, and Edward Davis for gracing us with their presence. Thank you for joining us on TSU TV, on Comcast, on demand.